It was 3 o'clock in the morning in Burbank, California. The applause had died. The band had packed up. And the man who had just made 50 million people laugh was sitting alone in his dressing room, chain-smoking a cigarette. Johnny Carson wasn't laughing anymore. In fact, he was furious. In the world of late-night television, Johnny Carson was God. From 1962 to 1992, if you wanted to sell a movie, save a career, or become a legend, you sat on the famous couch next to the king of late night. But here is the secret that Carson's biography never puts on the dust jacket: Johnny kept a list. Not a guest list. A ban list. For decades, rumors swirled about a blacklist hidden in Carson's office, a written record of celebrities who were rude, arrogant, or simply boring. According to Love Johnny Carson, a new book by Mark Mokoff, and confirmed by producer Peter Loss-Sally, the list was real. And while Carson was a gentleman on air, off-air, he was a notoriously harsh judge of character. Tonight, we are going to do something Johnny never did publicly: we are naming names. We are revealing the 7 male actors who were the biggest jerks to ever sit across from Johnny Carson. Some were legends. Some were icons. And one of them was the biggest star in the history of NBC. To understand why Johnny Carson hated a guest, you have to understand the man behind the desk. We tend to romanticize Johnny as the avuncular uncle in the suit. But Henry Bushkin, Carson's lawyer and best friend for 18 years, paints a darker picture in his memoir, Johnny Carson. Bushkin describes a man who was mercurial, sometimes cruel off-camera, a man who could turn on you with a single icy stare. Carson's producer, Peter Loss-Sally, once explained the Carson test. It was simple: be interesting, be humble, and don't screw up the timing. If you failed that test, you weren't just off the show, you were dead to him. Unlike today, where hosts apologize for guests, Carson would simply have security escort you out, and you would never, ever be invited back. But here is the twist: the men on this list aren't just B-list celebrities. They are titans of cinema. Men like Kirk Douglas, Burt Reynolds, and William Shatner. Why did Johnny hate them? Was it jealousy? Professional respect? Or were they really just jerks? Let's start with the man who thought he was bigger than the show. Before we look at the list, you need to understand the tension of the Tonight Show green room. There is a story from the early 1970s involving a very famous actor who will remain nameless for a moment, who was pacing backstage, drinking whiskey. He told his agent, "I'm going to go out there and take over the show." The agent warned him, "Don't try to steal Johnny's monologue laughs. Just answer the questions." The actor laughed. He walked out, interrupted Carson's opening applause, and grabbed the guest chair like a throne. He didn't talk to Johnny, he talked at the audience. For 7 minutes, Carson said nothing. He just smiled, that tight, frozen smile. You know, the one where his eyes look like ice chips. The moment the segment ended and the cameras cut to commercial, Carson leaned over to the actor, put a hand on his knee, and whispered something no microphone ever caught. The actor turned pale. He left the studio immediately and never returned. That is the power Johnny Carson wielded. And that actor? He is on this list. Let's start the countdown. Kirk Douglas was a legend. He was Spartacus. He was larger than life. But according to backstage accounts from NBC pageants of the era, Kirk had a habit of treating talk show hosts like servants. Douglas was notorious for changing his interview questions at the last second, insisting that Carson address him as Mr. Douglas, and ordering the staff around. On one specific appearance in the late 1970s, Douglas spent the entire commercial break berating a stagehand for the lighting being too harsh on his face, specifically the dimple in his chin. When Carson tried to lighten the mood, Douglas snapped, "I'm acting here, Johnny. You just hold the microphone." Carson's response was legendary. He turned to the audience and said, "Well, I guess that's why they call it playing hard to get." He then proceeded to ask Douglas the most boring, surface-level questions possible, effectively freezing the actor out of the conversation. Douglas sat there, smiling through gritted teeth, aware that he had been defeated on his own ego. In the 1980s, Chevy Chase was the biggest thing in comedy. He was the original Saturday Night Live star. But when Chevy sat down with Johnny, he made a fatal error. He acted like he didn't need to be there. Chevy had a reputation for being difficult, to put it mildly. During his interview, he constantly looked at the clock, sighed heavily, and gave one-word answers. At one point, when Johnny asked about his new movie, Chevy shrugged and said, "I don't know. You tell me. You're the one who booked me." The audience gasped. Johnny, who rarely broke character, raised an eyebrow. "Well, Chevy," Johnny said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "I booked you because I ran out of gas station attendants to interview." The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Chevy tried to laugh it off, but the damage was done. Chevy Chase rarely appeared on the show again during Carson's tenure. The king did not appreciate being disrespected by the court jester. Unlike Chevy, William Shatner didn't break the rules of politeness, he broke the rules of television. According to the Love Johnny Carson book, Shatner committed 3 deadly sins in a single appearance. First, he spoke in a monotone voice for 10 minutes without letting Johnny get a word in edgewise. Second, he turned his back on the host to wave at someone in the wings, a huge no-no in TV hosting. But the cardinal sin? He said the name of a competing network. In the golden age of late night, you did not mention ABC or CBS by name on NBC. Shatner did it. Johnny reportedly didn't even say goodbye to him. As soon as the red light went off, Carson walked off the set, leaving Shatner sitting alone on the couch. Producer Peter Law-Sally reportedly handed Shatner his coat and said, "Don't come back." He didn't for nearly a decade. Now we get to the big one. Bob Hope appeared on Carson's show over 100 times. He is the most frequent guest in the history of the program. But here is the shocking truth revealed by Richard Zoglin's biography Hope: Johnny Carson hated Bob Hope. Why? Because Bob Hope was a fraud in Carson's eyes. Hope couldn't tell a joke without a writer feeding it to him. He had no spontaneity. Andrew Nichols, Carson's co-writer, said, "There was nothing spontaneous about Hope. Johnny was very quick on his feet. There was nothing to talk to Bob about." Worse, Bob Hope used his clout at NBC to bully his way onto the show whenever he wanted. Imagine your boss forcing you to have dinner with your least favorite relative every Friday night for 30 years. That was Carson's life. But the jerk behavior came from Hope's condescension. He treated Johnny like the hired help. He would arrive with a script and demand Johnny read the questions verbatim. If Johnny improvised, Hope would get lost, squinting and shouting, "What? What?" It was a nightmare. Carson never said it publicly, but to his friends, he called Hope the most humorless man in Hollywood. This is where the story gets dark. John Wayne was an American icon, the Duke. But backstage at The Tonight Show, Wayne could be a bully. In the late 1960s, Wayne appeared on the show visibly intoxicated, which was not unusual. However, during the commercial break, Wayne allegedly grabbed Carson by the lapels. According to studio rumors, reported in several biographies of the era, Wayne didn't like the direction of the interview. He felt Carson was being too sarcastic about the Vietnam War. Wayne growled at him, "Listen, you skinny little microphone jockey. You talk about things you know nothing about." Carson was physically intimidated. Standing next to Wayne, Johnny looked like a high schooler. But Johnny didn't fight physically, he fought with his mind. When the cameras came back on, Carson smiled and said, "I've just been told we are out of time, ladies and gentlemen. John Wayne, everybody." A man who proves that size doesn't matter if you have a loud voice. Burt Reynolds claimed he saw the famous band list. He admitted in his memoir, "But enough about me that he knew he was on thin ice with Johnny." But why? Because Burt was a womanizer and a show-off. In the 1970s, Burt was the biggest box office star in the world. When he sat down with Johnny, he often tried to steal the show. He would bring on co-stars without permission. He would roughhouse with Ed McMahon, nearly knocking over the mic stands. But the breaking point came when Burt canceled on Johnny twice at the last minute to go to parties in Las Vegas. In the Carson universe, you do not humiliate the host. Bert later lamented that he should have handled it better, admitting that his ego got in the way. You didn't think it would be anyone else, did you? The search results tell a conflicting story. On one hand, Carson and Sinatra were friends. They shared the stage for the Dismas House fundraiser in St. Louis in 1965, raising $300,000 for charity. Carson even filled in for Joey Bishop and sang Birth of the Blues with the Rat Pack. On paper, they were allies. But that is business. That is the public face. The truth, revealed in the Love Johnny Carson band list, is that Frank Sinatra was a nightmare to host. Why? Because Frank Sinatra was the only guest who could intimidate Johnny. Sinatra didn't wait in the green room. He arrived with an entourage that took over the entire studio. He demanded the lighting be changed to hide his age. He refused to answer personal questions, and he would snap his fingers at the crew, calling them kid and pal in the most derogatory way possible. Furthermore, according to Carson's producer, the reason Sinatra was on the list was not a specific fight, but a death by 1,000 cuts of arrogance. Sinatra treated appearing on The Tonight Show like The Tonight Show should be grateful for his presence. One time, Sinatra lit a cigarette on stage, against network policy, and blew smoke directly into the camera lens because he felt like it. Carson hated this. But here is the tragedy, Johnny never banned him. He couldn't. Unlike Bob Hope or Burt Reynolds, Sinatra had mob ties and immense power. So, while the ban list existed in Johnny's heart, Sinatra was on a separate list, the untouchable list. He was the biggest jerk Johnny hosted, not because of one bad night, but because of a lifetime of making everyone else feel small, including the king of late night. So, what happened to these men? Kirk Douglas mellowed with age, but the Carson band stung him for years. William Shatner eventually returned, humbled, decades later. Bob Hope never knew the extent of Carson's hatred, because Johnny was too professional to show it on air. But here is the haunting part. Johnny Carson retired in 1992. He went to sea, sailing his yacht, the Gallant Lady. He became a near recluse. The man who had judged the jerks of Hollywood ended up lonelier than all of them. Henry Bushkin wrote that Johnny died having burned more bridges than anyone in show business. The ban list that protected his show also isolated his heart. He died in 2005, with few of those actors at his bedside. Because in the end, The Tonight Show was a kingdom, and Carson was the king. And as every king discovers, the throne is a lonely place when you banned everyone else from the room. The jokes may end, but the grudges? The grudges are forever. And that is the cold, hard truth from the couch.